let's get started with our webinar today. We are going to be talking about legal mistakes to avoid as an influencer or a content creator, or even if you're a small business owner and you're trying to create content for your blog or your website or your social media. So we're going to be talking about what things we definitely want to avoid today. My name is Paola Mendez, and I am the founder of the Blogger Union. The Blogger Union is a network of blogger communities dedicated to growing our members' brands and incomes through meetups, workshops, and brand collaborations. You hopefully soon will be able to start meeting in person again, and we have chapters all across the US that have members that meet in person about once a month, and they get to meet, collaborate, and learn from each other. If you want to find out more about that, you can check out thebloggerunion.com and become a member. It's free. And finally, my personal blog is Coral Gables Love, and I talk about travel and things to do in South Florida. And our speaker today is Jacqueline Garcia-Arteaga. She is an intellectual property attorney. And welcome, Jacqueline. How are you?
Hi, thank you, Paola, for having me. I'm super excited to get this presentation launched and, give a bunch of information to everybody here on how to protect their business, their entrepreneurship, their content creation. So I think let's just go ahead and hop into it. I share my screen.
Oh, sure. You have something you'd like to share with us? Go for it.
I just have the presentation that I had sent you previously.
Oh, we can refer to the slides when we hit like a specific topic that you want to share a slide, and we can just have more of a conversation for a little bit. And then if you guys have any questions, feel free to add them in the chat. Once we're done with our conversation, we will start looking at all the questions that you guys added in the chat, and we'll have a discussion. So let's get started with the first question. And that is, why is it important to know the rules of running a business before starting a business?
Okay, so this is a great question. You need to educate yourself beforehand. Making mistakes in the process of running or growing your business and not having the information about the legalities is never an excuse to doing something that is technically illegal or against the law. So like ignorance is never an excuse. That I didn't know I could take those pictures off of Google. I didn't know I could use that font. I didn't know that somebody had trademarked this name. That's never a defense to any of these sort of intellectual property violations. So it's best to have from the get-go an idea and a plan. You never want to learn retroactively that something that you're doing is illegal.
Oh my God, that is very good to know, because usually we start doing things and we're like, well, I have the best intentions,
Right.
I'm just going to do the best that I can. And if something happens, I genuinely didn't know. So like, I'll just tell them that and it will be fine. So I'm glad you're here, Jacqueline, telling us that it is much better to know about running a business. And I feel if you could tell us what would be the best way for us to know what we're doing so that we don't get into trouble. So do you feel like we should, before launching a business, get a consultation with an attorney? Yeah. What advice do you have for us?
100%. It's always like that baby consultation is so much cheaper than any mistake that you can make, right? I have a lot of clients that they come up with an idea, they haven't seen if it's actually available or if somebody has taken it up. Then we're talking about money that has been spent, that is lost, that you'll never recover. Meanwhile, these kinds of services, preliminary, will protect your business, protect you from wasting money on stuff that you're not going to be able to grow, right? So definitely from the forefront, whether it's for trademarking your brand name, copywriting your content, or simply, creating the business entity. I find very often a lot of people go to their accountants to get their business entities done, but right, everybody in their specialty is looking at it from one perspective, right? So an accountant is only looking at your business entity from a tax perspective, whereas a lawyer is looking at your business entity from a way where I'm like, how can I protect my client as much as humanly possible, and making sure that all of those little formalities that the court looks for are in place, so that, God forbid, we're in worst case scenario land, you're protected.
Wonderful. Okay, so there you guys have it. It's always worth it to get a consultation before you get started in business. And especially each state has their own rules. So it's different starting a business here in Florida than it's different starting in Georgia or in California or in Texas or New York. So it's definitely great to see somebody before you get started, just to get advice. And the for a small consultation like that, I mean, there's all ranges of attorneys, right? You can find one that's more affordable than one that's really expensive.
Right. Yeah,
Okay.
you definitely want to pay attention to your state issues. So like your business entity is something that lies within your state. I would recommend, like, I'm based in Florida, so if anybody in here at the presentation is in Florida, then I am more than willing and would love to help you. But I do like to send people in state specific things for attorneys in their state. There's formalities that every business entity has that is not the same across the board, because your business regulation at the state level is obviously regulated at the state level. So that's something you want to be very aware of.
Okay, perfect. Now, okay, so we talked a little bit in general. Okay, have someone that is knowledgeable to give you advice. So let's get a little bit more into specifics. So when you have an idea, whether it's for a small business, a blog, or something else, you start by picking a brand name or a blog name. So how can we search whether someone else is already using that name?
That's a wonderful question and a very important one. So, like, if I have to enumerate it, it's like, one, come up with your business idea and make sure you think about it to the maximum. Like, what kind of products or what kind of services are we going to provide? And really think of it, not only the service, but like the tiers of, like, do you want to be like a super high level, like only for like the most, I don't know, elite of the elite type of thing. Those are things that you really have to think about when you're planning. Once you're getting to the branding, that is literally like, it's like idea branding, okay? Branding is huge. Trademarking business names and logos has increased almost tenfold in the past year because everybody is working online. So a little bit of a background on like trademarking, and then I'll tell you like how you can do a very basic search. A trademark, if you're selling goods or services online, protects your brand name at a national level. Okay, it's essential to have that sort of protection because it gives you a monopoly over the name in that category of good or services that you are providing. So that is huge protection in the sense of, like, when we think about Coca-Cola, when we think about the name Nike, those are brand names that are, the name itself carries value. Like, think to yourself how much just the name Coca-Cola costs. All right. It becomes a business asset. It becomes a part of the business, something that with financial value. So branding is huge. It's huge for long-term success. It's huge to get financing. A lot of grants for minority-owned businesses, a lot of banks look for two main things, which is the business entity registration and some form of a trademark. Okay. Now, when you come up with a name, what you really want to do is make sure it is not already registered on the USPTO. You can do a very basic search on the USPTO, which is just typing in your name, and
Sorry
it'll.
to interrupt you, but if you could tell us what the USPTO is first.
All right. The USPTO is the United States Patent and Trademark Office. They have a website online. The website has a publicly accessible database named TESS, TESS. On TESS, and this is all available on their website, on TESS, you can search your brand name. Now, at the firm, when I do a preliminary search for a client, it's a little bit more in depth. It's, you know, the specific different kinds of words and that kind of thing. But basically, you want to make sure that your name is not already taken up. Because if your name is registered, that's a solid stop.
That's really interesting because usually when we want to start a blog or something, we think, okay, I'm going to Google my name and see if anybody's using it. And then I'm going to find out if I'll come up with a domain, and I'm going to look and see if that domain is available. But it doesn't cross your mind to go to the patent and trademark office and check if that name is taken, because it's possible, right, that the name is taken but they're not using it, right? So it won't show up on Google if you look for it, and the domain might be available, but someone actually trademarked that name in your category. Is that possible?
That is 100% correct. So when we go to actually register a trademark, you can register it under two different types of situations. You are registering with an intent to use in the future, or you register as I am currently using it right now in the market. It is publicly available, right? So that is a very important point that you brought up. It would not come up on Google, you know, if you just searched it and it's an intent to use it in the future situation.
Now that you mentioned that, if someone is to take and trademark a name for intent to use, are they able to trademark that name and never use it and just hog it?
No, no. So that's kind of like a domain troll, right? Where they take your .com and they're just being obnoxious. You sign a document that states that you're saving that in good faith. So if somebody can turn around and show that you're not doing that in good faith, then you can get in legal trouble. I mean, but I've seen the intent to use in the future registered years in advance. You know what I mean? So it's not something that has like a specific kind of like, don't compare it to domains. Like the domain situation is completely different. An intent to use, when there's filing, they sign the document that they're gonna use it in good faith, and that's pretty much respected.
Okay, wonderful. So let's talk about if we inadvertently, right? We inadvertently went on social media and we opened an account under a name, or maybe we went and bought a domain with a name that is already trademarked. Can we get in trouble? What can happen and what can we do?
Right. So the trademarking situation as to domains and handles are very different. They would have to be registered as the actual handle or the actual domain. For the most part, you want to look at the brand name. So minus the at, minus the .com, because at the same time, you don't want to be wasting these kinds of funds on purchasing domains, on trying to buy somebody's handle when the name itself is not available on the USPTO. So I'd bring everybody back to the beginning to step 2 and be like, is it available or is it not available? And at that point, if it is available, then you can move forward with occupying the domain and the handle.
Right. But let's pretend that I don't know that Coca-Cola exists. And so I go out and I see Coca-Cola dot, I don't know, dot me is available, because coca-cola.com for sure is not going to be available. I see coca-cola.me is available, and I buy it and I start my blog and I'm using that domain. Can they tell me you can't use that anymore and I'd have to go and start again?
Most domains, so yeah, that's where it differs. So the laws that regulate domain purchases are different than the laws that regulate trade names. Okay, a URL is normally in a good situation, so long as you're doing legitimate business on the website.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you are actually, selling a good, selling a service, or even like we've seen many times when we go to buy a URL, if they're just posting ads, that would be, sufficient to say that they're at least attempting to use it in a legitimate fashion. So yeah, the domain versus the trademark regulations are separate. That would be a separate analysis completely.
Oh, okay, I see. All right, well, then let's talk about business entities. You mentioned that you should um, create a business entity for your business. So, what is a business entity?
Right, right. I personally, right, in the world that I live in, I'm like business entity. And when you choose whether you're going to be a sole proprietorship, a partnership, an LLC, or a corporation. For the sake of legal purposes, like sole proprietorships and partnerships don't offer you liability protection in general. Well, sole proprietorships for sure do not, and partnerships only give a certain very limited amount to a certain kind of investor, which is why we don't really talk about it in the legal world. It's kind of like a joke, even like where it's like so little protection that you don't even talk about it. So I'm just going to talk about, when we're talking about business entities, the LLC versus the INC, which is a corporation.
Okay.
And you want to choose whatever is best for you in that situation. And people have different needs. So I can't tell everybody here, like for sure, choose an LLC versus a corporation. What I can do is explain to you the biggest differences between the two. Okay. And then you guys can make an educated decision on your own. So an LLC gives you the liability protection, but you don't have the same requirements as a corporation to have like annual meetings, quarterly meetings with minutes for the meetings and those kinds of things. Corporations are a little more formal in their practice and their day-to-day than an LLC is. So for example, if we ended up in front of a judge because you did something negligent and you don't have your meetings with your minutes with for all those formalities for the corporation, and you're being litigated against at that moment in court, they're going to use the fact that you're not keeping up with those formalities against you to show that you don't deserve the liability protection that this business is giving you. And that means, to get to the point, is your personal assets are now on the line. So your house, your savings, your checking, the car, those are things that we are insulating with the LLC or the corporation. So that's why you really want to choose a business entity, is because like from me to my client, I'm like, let me put my client in a bubble, I'm like, protect them, protect their personal assets, make sure the business assets are completely separate, and that all of these formalities are in place so that they're never at risk.
Okay, perfect. Because it is possible to run your business just as a person without a business entity, right? You can make deals and have your W-9 with your social security instead of your business social security, which is called the EIN number. Um, but when you have when you have the business entity, it's protecting your personal things that you own. So
Yes.
that if God forbid there is like a lawsuit or something, they're not going to go after your house as and your car and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
you're protecting that. So okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. So okay. Um do so you mentioned an operating agreement. If we were to open an LLC, do we need an operating agreement?
Oh, yes, 100%. And that's why that goes to one of my first comments in the beginning, where it's like the accountant just wants you registered with the state so they can get the EIN and they can file the taxes. And I get the client, I go, where's your operating agreement? Where's like your second business account? Where is your, these formalities need to be in place. So you form the business, whether it's an LLC or a corporation, you are going to have some sort of contract between you and how that business is run. For an LLC, it's an operating agreement. For a corporation, those are called your bylaws. And you want to make sure that you have it and you sign it and you have it notarized to show in court that you have always had it this way. You know what I mean? This agreement is a living agreement, which means like it gets updated. So even though LLCs don't require meetings like corporations, I would still recommend that everybody should be sitting down at least once a year and reviewing their operating agreement and saying, is this still up to date? Have we brought somebody into the business? Does this need to be updated at this moment? And just little formalities to make sure that the business is protected and you're maintaining that liability protection that it gives you.
Wonderful. Do you have any recommendations for us in terms of resources where we might be able to find templates for an operating agreement?
Well, I'm so happy you asked. Yes, I do have very soon on my Shopify site, or in the next like week or so, we're going to be selling operating agreements that you can fill out yourself, because that way people in other states can make sure that they're also covering themselves legally. I have a lot of clients, since I do federal law with the trademarks, that are all over the US, and they're like, I need this document. My accountant didn't give it to me, so yes, we're definitely going to be providing that very soon.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so when we run a business, we are hoping to make lots of money. So, what do we need to know about finances as a business owner? Should we pay ourselves? What responsibilities do we have if we pay other people? Do we have to pay taxes? How do we know how much and when to pay them?
Right, the infamous question is always money. Money. I mean, we all need money, we all need to survive. Again, I'm going to use the F word, formalities. There are certain formalities you need to have when you're paying yourself. Okay, so right, we registered the entity with your state, you have your operating agreement, we have the separate business checking account that you now have with your EIN number. You want to make sure a couple of basic things I always say. You're paying yourself directly to your personal account from the business account. Okay, I don't want to hear in a consult that you just take the debit card, the business debit card, to the ATM and just take out cash. Right, the business checking account should be very much sacred, in the sense of like the transactions are done formality, all the people that you pay for your services are being paid directly from there. Like, I tell my clients, like, don't use cash. Like, make sure the transaction is traceable. Make sure you're invoicing people for the services to show receipts that that's money that you spent. That's money that, right? Like, so I have somebody who helps me with social media. She sends me her invoice. I keep those invoices in my receipt because come tax season, I'm like, oh, look, I had to pay for marketing. I had to pay for content creation. I had to pay my assistant. So all of those things, you want to keep a very close eye on them for when, tax season comes around. God forbid the IRS ever knocks on your door, right? And wants to do an audit, you need to have all those receipts in place as well. Then from the business standpoint, it's very much like the business account is not your piggy bank. Like you don't just dip into it whenever you want to get some cash. Like very much like pick a number that you feel comfortable with your business at the moment and make sure that those transactions are going straight from business to personal account.
And that is when you're talking about paying yourself from your business.
100%.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So, okay, we have just one more question, and then we're going to switch over to questions from the audience. And especially for business owners and content creators, sometimes we need an image for our blog or a website, or we're trying to create a social media graphic, and we're like, oh, I need a picture of a bell pepper, whatever. So I go on Google and I search bell pepper, and I go to Google Images, I grab the first image that I find there, and I put it in my website and use it. But I just found it on Google search. Now, can you tell us, Jackie, why you shouldn't do that?
Oh my gosh. This is like worst case scenario type of situation. You don't want to put yourself in a situation where you're using an image that somebody else has copyrighted without a license, without their consent. That is worst case scenario. I would 100%, like, I don't really trust the websites to say like, oh, free images to use and this kind of that. Talk to local content creators, talk to your local photographers, get licenses from them to use the photographs that they create, spend some money on your business in this sense, which is also a tax deduction because money that you spend for business purposes is a tax deductible, but I'm getting distracted. The point is, if you take an image that has been registered with the Copyright Office and you're using it on your website, that is a sure way to get hit with a lawsuit and a big fat fine. Okay. And I've had these kind of situations with clients before where it's like, oh, but my assistant from Lord knows where, right? Because everybody's working virtual and remote, just took a bunch of pictures of, Bill Gates and Beyonce and posted them on my website. And now I'm getting hit with a bill for, the last bill I saw, I think was like $4,000 something because they were using these images without licenses. So be very aware of that. And again, my recommendation, especially to small businesses and entrepreneurs and bloggers, would be reach out to people in your area. If you see a photographer who makes good content that you would like to get to know and you want to license some of their stuff, reach out to them. Be like, hey, can I use this photograph? I really like it, and come to an agreement in writing between you and that person on how that license is going to work. You're going to be way better off than ever getting anything online.
I really love that advice because it also helps you to support small businesses, right? Small content creators that are in your area. But also, if you're in a pinch and you don't have the time to hire a photographer and you need to pick that picture of the bell pepper, then you can pay for stock photography also online, and that gives you that license to use it. So you can do it that way. And there are also websites that offer free stock photography, but I think Jackie is telling us sometimes those have images that are copywritten and we wouldn't know. I guess that's something I learned today. All right, so that was my final question for today. So let's get into some of the audience questions because they are coming in. Kelly is asking, If we want to have a parent company and our blog influencer business would be a child company under that parent company, would you recommend us choosing an LLC or a corporation?
Oh, that 100% depends on what you're doing, what kind of investors you're looking for. Remember, the biggest differences between LLC and corporation are mostly the formalities in place that you have to be sure to maintain. So a corporation, you're for sure gonna have, quarterly meetings, annual meetings, minutes, which are notes to those meetings, and all of that has to be very organized and traceable. If my artists are not the most organized people in the world, so I let them, you have to decide if you can handle those responsibilities and not, and also if the tax benefits would actually benefit you to that point.
Okay. Also, now that she mentions that, let's say you pick an LLC because you don't want to file, all those meetings and have those minutes and all that stuff is like too much hassle. You're not like a huge business. You're like a one-person operation. So you go for the LLC. But then you have like a big business and then you come up with a smaller kind of sub business inside of that. And there is this thing in the Florida Sunbiz that I see that is called oh my god, now I'm forgetting. I think it's just a registered name, a DBA, a doing business as. That's what it's called. Would you recommend us for that little business? Because when you doing business as means that it's not like a full existing business, but that you can do business as that name.
I would say that the doing business as is more just an identifier so that when they write the check, they can write that name. Because that also goes again to like the formality of the business. If you're getting a check, which none of us are getting checks, okay? All of us Zelle each other, Cash App each other. Like I can count on one hand the number of times I've had to, get paid with a physical check. That's more like an old school notion on the making sure that the business name and the person who you're writing out the checks to are still consistent. Because, for example, you can have your business as a name that's completely different to your brand name, right? So I can have my business registered as, right, Arteaga Law LLC. That's my business entity. And then I'm doing all my branding as the IP guru. If I want that recognition, right, I do DBA, the IP guru, and then, if I get a check with the IP guru on it, it's still understood that it's going into Arteaga Law LLC.
No, that's wonderful. So when you have that set up with the entity of Arteaga Law and the doing business as the DBA as IP Guru, you can open a bank account, right? And they can make a check to either of those names, correct?
Right.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. All right, next. Kelly Lynn is asking, TurboTax doesn't even know this one. Do we have to pay taxes on goods? When we talk about goods, she's talking about when brands pay us with goods. So a lot of influencers and content creators get gifted products. Is it just goods that are part of a service exchange, or even those that just show up at your homes? So sometimes you get a gifted product, but you're expected to deliver like a blog post and Instagram post, or sometimes they just give it to you and there is no expectation of you doing anything. You can do whatever you want with it. And if you do have to pay taxes, how do you determine the retail value of these things?
That's a pretty good question. And I am not 100% on the answer because that's more is a tax question. But if I had to give some sort of response to this, I would say if you don't have a formal contract saying, I am I'm sending you these products in compensation for this kind of service, then that's not a payment in a good. right? You're being gifted something. If a retailer gifts you something, that's not a payment. It's a gift.
Okay. And so then you recommend talking to an accountant so that they
100%.
can give you the advice of whether you need to pay taxes on gifts and whether you have to, how you pay taxes on those products. Okay.
Right. Normally, you don't have to pay taxes on gifts unless the gifts seem to like pass. I think the last time I checked was like $14,700 or something like that. So double check that with your accountant, your tax preparer, and also rather than TurboTax, there's a lot of small business accountant and tax preparers online. So I would let Kelly Lynn know that. There's probably people in her area who have very good answers to this that just are waiting to serve her.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. Angela is saying, I'm an artist in Atlanta and was wondering, should I be copywriting my paintings and murals?
100%. So the copyright is a beautiful thing. It has to be registered with the Copyright Office for you to get an injunction against someone. So let's break down some of the legalese for a second. Copyright comes into existence the moment that the thing is created, right? So the moment that the mural is created, the copyright comes into existence. The copyright is not registered until it is registered with the Copyright Office. Now, whether you want to register it with the Copyright Office, I would recommend it. If you can afford it, 100% do it, because you will get people who will attempt to replicate it, copy it, and that kind of thing. And not even, I would say more importantly for her, it's to make sure that whoever you're doing the murals for, and this is something that we didn't talk about beforehand, your contract with whoever you're providing the service with, it has to be in writing. It has to say who owns what of these things that you are creating, right? Whether they're photographs, whether they're paintings, whether they're murals, right? People, right? My creatives, they're not business paper kind of people. They want to create the art, they want to express themselves, and I love that. But I'm like, please, for the love of God, protect yourselves. You don't want to be taken for a ride. So there's very specific language that you need to be looking into in your contracts to make sure you're holding on to that ownership of the copyright after it's already on a mural.
Okay, lovely. And that would also come into play, right? If you're talking about any type of brand partnership and you're creating content for them, do you recommend having in that contract that you retain ownership of all the content that you created, correct?
Right. Right, there's two different hats that an attorney has to wear in these situations, because my creative comes to me and they say, I'm gonna do something for somebody else. And I'm like, okay, I'm protecting my creative. Like, all the rights still belong to them. Like, they're just giving this person's a license. If they want to make any changes to it, like, we are making sure you are created. Vice versa, once my creative needs to hiring people, outsourcing services, we're talking about a different kind of contract where now they're the one telling the person that they are hiring, like, no, you don't own anything. No, it's all mine. And those are things that you want to be aware of when you're doing this business. Make sure that you're retaining the ownership to whatever it is that you're creating.
Oh, that's a wonderful point because sometimes we hire photographers, right? And, you know, uh, when it's an up and coming photographer, you can have that discussion of like who owns the ownership of those photographs, right? And
Right.
some photographers will want to continue to own the license, and some will give it to you. But that's something that you should discuss before you take those photographs. So that's
Yes, the main word there is before. Before the photographs are taken, before the service is given, we are outlining the intellectual property rights in a written contract. Okay, so yes, 100%.
Okay, wonderful. Nicole is asking, I take a lot of pictures for my blog and Instagram. I have been approached by 2 companies asking to use my photos and giving me an agreement that gives them a lot of rights. What is the best way to protect my photos? Just put a copyright symbol on them?
No. I mean, no. You can't put a copyright symbol on it until it's registered and you have that registration in hand. I would say again, the best way for you to protect your photographs is to make sure that you are giving them the contract. You're not taking it from them. You know what I mean? All of us who provide a good or a service should have a template that protects you to the maximum. Whether you negotiate and you budge on certain things, that is your decision to make. But like, again, from my standpoint, when a client comes to me, they like, I need a standardized contract for this kind of service. And I'll give them a template that they can use for the rest of their existence of the business to manipulate as they see fit to protect themselves, right? So if the images aren't copyrighted and registered, what you're really trying to focus in on, again, is that contract.
Right. I think that's great advice in having your own contract. But then the reality is that, a big brand comes along and they're like, no, we don't want to sign your contract. You have to sign our contract. But when I have been in that situation, and, especially when it's a contract where, there is enough money in play that it is worth investing in an attorney to take a look over your contract to make sure that specifically those rights are, are protected, the rights that I'm looking for the content that I'm creating, because you can even have that discussion with the brand. I've had discussions with the brand where like, okay, great, we're going to do this, this, and this. And if you want to use my photographs outside of this partnership and you want to use them on advertising or on your website and stuff like that, it's going to be an additional fee. And they're like, oh, it's okay. We don't want that. We don't, at this moment, we don't want to go down that path about licensing the images right now. And then they turn back and they send me a boilerplate contract that has, they own all of my work in perpetuity and it's not mine. So I mean, if you don't, so that is when I always recommend have an attorney take a look over it, because they're the ones who are going to know the language so that they can make the changes in the contract, and you can go always have the confidence to have that discussion with the brand that says, we talked specifically about the rights of the content, and we had agreed to this, so I made these changes to the contract to match what we had agreed upon and what our discussion was. And at that point, it depends on who you're working with. Some brands are going to be like, you signed the boilerplate contract, give away all of your rights, or we're not working together. And some brands will be like, oh yeah, that was just a boilerplate contract, and thank you for making those changes. We'll change them on our end and we'll send you a fresh contract and we will move forward from that. So there you go. Okay, wonderful.
No, yeah, I 100% agree. You're gonna, big brands, the gorilla pumping their chest. I totally, because they have the brand recognition. You're like, oh, lowly blogger, you don't really know anything. So we're gonna like scare you with this 20-page contract that just goes on and on about nonsense. 100% get it reviewed by an attorney. 100%, if they're playing hardball, you can bring the attorney to the negotiation table. You know what I mean? If you're scared, if you're timid, you're not sure, let us be your pit bull, right? That's what we're here for, is to protect you. So, I mean, like, when I have my clients right in mind, that's like a dog with a bone. Like, you're not taking that away from me. You know what I mean? So advocate for yourself. Don't just take the plain contract that says that they own everything and your firstborn and the rights in perpetuity. You know, those rights in perpetuity, some of them last over 120 years. That's a big deal. You know, so please have someone review it.
Wonderful. Thank you. Okay, Rebecca is asking, if you use one of those sites that have free stock photography and they ask you to give credit and you do, does that cover you?
No. I don't trust those sites. I don't trust any of those sites. I'd be extremely cautious unless you have like an email communication where you're talking directly with the person and we can, you know, we have a paper trail of this communication. That's why we attorneys, we love emails. I'm like, you see in this email where I told you not to do that, or you see in that email where we agreed to this kind of a term. If you don't feel comfortable drafting your own contract, at the very least, an email will go to show what you have discussed and that that person approved it. I'm very hesitant to trust any free stock photography. And then also, again, to go to the point, like, there's so many affordable photographers online that you can get good licenses from. So why would we play with fire if you can just spend a little bit of money, tax deducted as a business expense, right? So no.
Okay. All right, Rebecca is back and asking about the DBAs. She says, can we have more than one DBA, or is it advisable to only have one?
I think you can only have one, honestly, Rebecca. In Florida, I've seen that you can have one. I wouldn't advise to have more than one. When people start doing too many projects under the same business entity, you're putting the business at risk. I don't know how much the business entity costs within your state. Because, like, for example, in California, I know it costs $800. So it's in that case, right, where the business entity costs so much money up front. In Florida, it doesn't cost that much money. If you have the separate business, we're creating a separate bubble from the main business. So, like, for example, I have clients who do freelancing lecture giving, and that's one business entity. And then she also has a business school, so then that's a separate business entity. And then also, you know, so there's no liability cross contamination. And if you're thinking about, oh well, then I have to spend money on a new business entity, think of it as insurance. You're just paying insurance. That's essentially what you're getting.
Right. But I also find that each time you open a new business entity, there are other costs to having a business entity, annual recurring costs, right? So
Right.
for each business entity, I find you have to file business taxes for that business entity, and you're going to have to hire an accountant to prepare those taxes for you. In
Yeah.
Florida, there's also the annual corporation
Renewal report. Yeah.
renewal report. And so the little fees start adding up. So, how do you know when you're ready? Because some of us have like a variety of businesses that we put under one umbrella. So, how do you know when you're ready to make that,
Right.
you know?
When the liability costs, when the liability risk costs more than the renewals, that's when you should 100%. Let's say, like, Paola, you have your blogging business, and then Paola now does motivational speaking. If Paola has her blogging business and it's making good money, and now she's doing her motivational speaking as a different business, why would she put the blog at risk, right? uh, Everybody arrives to that conclusion when they find it best. I find more often than not the business deductions that you can clear out normally equate the price at the very least.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Jackie. All righty, and I think this might be our last question. And Kelly is asking, are we supposed to copyright everything that we create? Can we bulk copyright a lot of assets?
Okay, that's a great question, Kelly. You want to copyright the things that you can afford to copyright, the things that are most important to your business. So for example, sometimes with clients, right, a trademark will cost between the costs and everything between 1,400 to like 1,800, very much depending on, right, like let's say that's one basic trademark in one basic category. If you wanted to protect the logo, right, that would be an additional $1,400. So for people who can't afford that at the moment, what you can do is copyright the image and whatever facet that you're using it, and that gives you some sort of protection. So that's one way to think about it in that aspect. Another thing that you want to think about is like sometimes people who teach things, rather than coming out with 6 mini workbooks, I'm like, well, why don't you come out with a textbook and we can register the one textbook rather than 6 mini workbooks? That's one way to go about cutting that expense as well. So it very much depends. If you're simply creating content online, if the video goes viral, that's definitely something you want to be registering as soon as possible. So yeah, it's essentially, it depends on what you're copywriting, how much you have to copyright, and what your budget is.
So you mentioned that a trademark is around $1,000 to $1,600. How much is the cost to copyright?
The cost of copyright also depends on the what we're registering and how much of it are we registering. That normally will be between like $300 to $600. Everything's sort of on a range because, you know, you're talking about very different types of things that can be registered.
Great. And then also, I believe I remember an attorney talking about copywriting collections. Is that something I'm remembering properly? If you want to
Like if you have a
copy.
series.
Mm-hmm.
Right. That can make something a little bit more affordable, but it's still like a collection is like a collection of art that you created, or like if you're a writer, right, a collection of works that you wrote, right, if they go together in like a similar theme, those are things that you can register. They like balance each other out basically. Like you can do it in the groups, but it's not as expensive as obviously like doing the registration one by one by one.
Okay. All right. And here is our final question. And it says, how would you go about copywriting a blog or a website? Would it be by individual post or image? How would that work?
Right. So I would definitely recommend that you could do like a little mini work of art, like a collection of the writing with the photograph, and register that together on the site. Well, it's honestly what they're trying to protect the most, right? Is it the words we're trying to protect the most versus the image? And, you know, like what means more to them as the blog writer? Is it just the words or is it just the image?
Okay, wonderful. And then I guess, sorry, last question. So we're content creators and we might be starting off and we don't have the budget to copyright every single image that we put on our website and every single article that we write on our website. So is there a inherent protection that we created this and we published it and there's like what's the word? There was a type of copyright. It's called um, I forgot. Uncommon law, common law, copyright.
Right.
Yes. Sorry, I'm forgetting the term. Does that still exist? Is that a thing? Will it actually protect you?
So the copyright comes into existence as soon as the content is finalized, is fixed to a medium. That's the actual terminology straight from the law. The point in registering is so that people can't take that exact thing and repost it. And if they do that in violation of your rights, you at that point, since you are already registered, can have an injunction brought against them in court so that they would have to stop all use of that immediately.
Right. So
That's the main purpose of the actual registration, is like if somebody's, you know, um,
using your work without permission.
yes, yes. If they're using your work without permission, then you have to have it registered to have that injunction brought.
So what you're saying is if someone takes your work without permission and you did not specifically copyright it, you are not able to go after them?
You can try, so right, there's the difference between like actual law and societal norms. You can like try to cancel them online. You know what I mean? Society still functions to keep checks and balances in place. Very often law works like retroactively. So like if you're an artist and somebody took your content and is trying to pass it off on their own, I would make some noise about that. But yes, essentially if you don't have it registered, we're not going to be able to go to court and have that injunction brought. But also when we're talking about small businesses, small entrepreneurs, small time creators who are growing in their status, do you have the money to go to court and have this injunction brought? I don't know. You have to, that's where that person has to sort of balance it out.
Okay, wonderful. And I think that there are also, you don't actually have to go to court, right? You can maybe just send them a cease and desist letter,
Right.
and that might, before going to court, get them to stop using your work. Is that correct?
Right. So you can send them a cease and desist. You can have an attorney send them a cease and desist. So normally a little bit scarier when there's an Esquire at the end of the letter, because they panic a little bit. And as a brand person, you want to scare them straight. But yes, essentially you can have the cease and desist. If they continue, hopefully at that point you have your registration in hand, and if they continue to violate it, then you can go to court and have the injunction. But essentially the cease and desist letter is to scare them into submission.
Okay, wonderful, Jackie. That was my last question, and I believe that was also the last question from the audience. And it's right 1:00 on the dot. Thank you so much for joining us today, Jackie, and sharing all of your insights. Please, everyone, follow Jackie at the IP Guru. Do you have anything that's upcoming that you would like to share with us?
No, but you can definitely, so my handle on Instagram is at the IP Guru. Just typed it into the chat. Our website is the IP.guru. Oh, I misspelled it there. The IP.guru. Sorry. I have my glasses on, but then I have to like get closer to the computer to actually see. We have free downloadables. We're always hosting content or IGTV lives. Like the objective of my law firm is to work with small businesses, entrepreneurs, like educate yourself, protect your business, make sure you're doing this correctly. We're just here to serve and to give you all the power you need to make sure that your business is not a statistic, right? Like we want to see you long-term, like Coca-Cola status, okay? So please, we want to build big brands, protect you and your family, create generational wealth. And you do that making sure that you've got these bases covered.
That is wonderful advice. Thank you so much, Jackie, for coming and joining us today. Please follow Jacqueline for intellectual property advice and legal advice. And as always, visit thebloggerunion.eventbrite.com for upcoming webinars. I know we have a webinar on how to think like a publicist and how to monetize your recipes and your food photographer, and we have a ton of topics. So I will see you guys next week, and I hope you have a wonderful week. Bye, everyone.
Bye, see you.